Welcome. Now, a few minutes for folks to come in, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the program today. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Braden Kay with the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program at the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation. We're here because we have a second round of funding. And as part of that, are bringing in national best practice examples potential grantees get for their projects. So I'm going to speak for a few moments here about our grant program in the first round, and then we have two amazing guests that are doing work in Salt Lake City to talk about the work they've been doing, and I think it'll be a really interesting conversation that we'll have today. All right, next slide. So, in terms of today, we'll go do a brief overview of the Extreme Heat Grant Program, and then we will have the conversation um, around Salt Lake City, and then we will direct you towards different ways where you can continue to be in conversation with us about round two of the grant program. Next slide. So this second round of funding, there's going to be $27.5 million available. This is money that's coming from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, as well as the Prop 4 climate bond. Because of both of these types of money, this is really to fund infrastructure for extreme heat. For those of you that were familiar with the first round of our grant program, it had general fund money, and so it was really able to fund response efforts and awareness efforts and community resilience efforts that did not have to include infrastructure. And in this time around, our program can have some of those elements, but it has to fund infrastructure projects. Next slide. So we have four program values that are really guiding this second round. We had in our first round 10 values, and now we've whittled it down to four. Harm reduction, so that's reducing the immediate heat, the risk of heat-related illness and death. So how is your project reducing harm, especially harm from a particularly vulnerable population in your community? Partnerships, which we're going to hear a lot about today from Salt Lake City. This recognizes that effective solutions require both community knowledge and implementation capacity. And so we're trying to make sure that the projects that are applying to our program have both community voice and institutional knowledge working together to deliver the project. We have the value of belonging, which is to ensure that the infrastructure is designed with and for the people that use it. And then lasting community benefits. The idea that the investment that the state is making with you now extends beyond the immediate outputs of the infrastructure building, and is trying to help your community build the momentum to attract investment for future infrastructure in the future. Next slide. So we have two grant types that you can apply for. If you apply to one, you can apply to the other, but you're competing within these two buckets. So there'll be $7.5 million available for early infrastructure grants. These The purpose is for you to create a planning document for heat infrastructure. So it's a planning grant, but you have to have a demonstration component to it. So you must actually build something as well. And that demonstration project can help inform the planning that you're doing. So an example of this would be to create a cool corridor master plan that has a single corridor shade structure demonstration project. On the advanced side, this is a piece of infrastructure that you probably have already been planning for. You have to complete this infrastructure within 48 months. And the vast majority of the funding that we're funding you for is for the infrastructure, but we are asking you to do a future implementation playbook that's helping you think about how to do more of that infrastructure in the future. So example of this would be a cool corridor construction where you construct treescapes and shade structures along a street corridor, but that you then create a future implementation playbook of how you would do cool corridors throughout the rest of your jurisdiction. All right, next slide. So in terms of what kinds of projects people will be doing, built environment solutions such as cool pavements, shading, passive mechanical cooling, building upgrades, hydration stations, transit shelters, built environment changes that can reduce people's risk to extreme heat. Also nature-based solutions, so urban forestry investments in green spaces, green stormwater infrastructure, and then also projects that combine both built environment solutions with nature-based solutions. Next slide. So a little bit more about these two project types. The early infrastructure projects, 30-month projects, 750,000 to 1.2 million. 25 to 60% of your budget needs to be on that demonstration project. So you can kind of build these projects two different ways. It can be mostly a planning project that has 25% for infrastructure, or it can be an infrastructure demonstration project that's 60% of the budget for infrastructure and then less for planning. So you can kind of use the project to fit your needs, whether you need to do more planning heavy or more demonstration heavy. And then there are minimum requirements for how much you spend on that goes to your partner on the project. So 8% minimum for the early projects. And then there's also a requirement for how much money you spend on your belonging initiative. So if you hire a social worker or artists or creatives or culture bearers to help you make sure that infrastructure belongs to the place that it's happening, we're requiring that a certain amount of money gets spent on that work. On the advanced infrastructure side, 48-month projects, $3 million to $4.5 million projects, 70% minimum has to go towards the infrastructure and the plans and processes required to build that infrastructure. And then you have minimum requirements of 6% for partnerships and 2% for belonging. And then we allow for 15% indirect costs for both of the project types. Next slide. So we do have a priority point system. We'll have some sessions that go into how to determine your priority points on the project, but we are prioritizing California Native American tribes, severely disadvantaged communities, and then vulnerable populations as determined by the Vulnerable Communities Platform that LCI has produced and released recently. And we'll be able to provide more information about priority points in future sessions. Next slide. So in a little bit about who can apply, local and regional public entities, community-based organizations, coalitions, public higher academic institutions, and then California Native American tribes are all eligible. And then there's different partnership requirements for the different types of organizations. And we can get into those details of what your partners need to look like depending on who you are as a lead applicant at future sessions. Next slide. So a little bit about the process. We have our pre-application window 1 is open right now. Our guidelines were released last week. So you have an opportunity to give us your project ideas by July 21st. If you want one-on-one technical assistance from our third-party provider, you have to apply in window 1. So you request technical assistance, you get feedback from us, and then once you get that feedback, we'll give you a link to the full application. If you don't think you need one-on-one TA request, you can participate in window two and give us your project idea and your partners and answer, a short amount of questions. By August 11th. And then the final application is going to be due in October. We do note if you have a project idea, it's great to get it into us at window one, whether you do need TA or not, because we can get you feedback and it allows you time to continue to work on your project. Next slide. So in terms of the timeline for this, our guidelines have been released. Application window one closes July 21st. We'll give feedback to you the week of August 10th, and then the full application deadline is October 13th, with the idea of trying to make awards in early 2027. Next slide. So now we get to this amazing set of case studies from Salt Lake City. So Nancy Monteith is a senior landscape architect at the Planning and Design Division at Salt Lake City Department of Public Lands, who's going to talk to you about the Green Loop. And then you're going to hear from Ronnie Pacetto who's the executive director of the Seven Canyons Trust. And I think one thing that I want you paying attention to when you hear these presentations is they are both examples of having a big idea, a vision of something that could happen decades from now, and then how you take that vision of the future and help a community get there project by project by project. And so, as you can probably tell from the way that we're thinking about our early infrastructure grants, we want you to build a vision that then can have projects come after it to build towards the type of resilient city or resilient to extreme heat community that you want to have. And so Salt Lake City has two of these visions. There's the Green Loop vision, and then there's the vision, the 100-year vision for daylighting the seven tributaries of the South Jordan River. So you're going to hear two visions today, and then you're also going to hear about projects that are building towards those visions. And we're going to start off with Nancy. So thank you both so much for being here. We'll have each of them present for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. If you have questions about the grant program itself, we're going to ask you to come to a future session, either on either on June 25th or June 30th. And so that's where we'll be answering questions about the grant program. Today, we'll just be answering questions about these two case studies. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Nancy. Thank
you so much, Braden. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you all for having me here today. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to share Salt Lake City's work on the Green Loop. This is an ambitious generational project that has the potential to transform our downtown for a more resilient and equitable future. This vision includes tree-lined blocks with public art installations, expanded patio seating, acres and acres of open space, and safer, active transportation for biking and walking, also new events, and many other opportunities for Salt Lake City. These projects are essential for elevating our quality of life, especially downtown, which is seeing huge growth for new residents. It's definitely still a project on paper, and we are working diligently to break it down into implementable segments. So next slide. So the Green Loop is essentially a 5.3-mile corridor that goes around downtown. Salt Lake City has notoriously wide right-of-ways. They're 132 feet wide, which is the equivalent to 7 lanes of traffic. And the urban legend is that was so you could turn an ox cart around. Well, we realize that today we need trees and shade and green space amenities for people to live downtown. So this project will reconstruct 5 miles of downtown city streets into places for every generation, not only to drive, but to come together to bike, walk, shop, read, play, and everything in between. Next slide. So the Green Loop is founded on several principles. So developing a robust downtown urban forest, serving as an active transportation corridor for walking and biking, improving water quality through stormwater management, and creating inviting social spaces that provide a variety of amenities and attractions, as well as creating public front yards and gardens within the downtown that support the needs of all users. Next slide. So a little bit about the Green Loop history. Where did it come from? So the idea of the Green Loop was first described in the 2007 Downtown Rising Plan by the Salt Lake Chamber. And it's just one move among many that to create this connected and thriving city. It emphasizes a green canopy embedded in a network of east-west connections to major green spaces across the city. It layers many modes of travel to support walking, biking, light rail, and commuter rail. As you can see, the Green Loop in concept has been included by many plans subsequent to that Downtown Rising Plan in 2007, and most recently in the Downtown Master Plan, which was in 2016. And one of the key issues to resolve was the lack of green space and tree canopy cover. And then Reimagine Nature, the Public Lands Master Plan, has it as a key element to increase green space downtown. Next slide. This image is of downtown Salt Lake City, and it is color, even if it doesn't look that way. And you can see here the dearth of green space and greening. There are a few spots. We have 3 10-acre parks that comprise Pioneer, Washington Square, and Library Square, but otherwise it's pretty hardscape downtown. And then in 2019, Public Lands conducted a needs assessment in the Central City neighborhood area, which has the highest level of need for new park space in the city. And with a built-out city, it's very difficult to compete with developers and other land uses to create new green space. So reimagining the right-of-way to be multifunctional in a linear park is one way the city can use its land that it owns to add more uses and more benefits in that right-of-way. Currently, only 1.9% of the downtown planning area is park space in a neighborhood where residents typically live in multifamily buildings with no private green space. And the downtown only has 6% tree canopy, and only the airport has fewer trees than downtown. Next slide. In 2023, the city partnered with Utah State University, NASA, and the Heat Watch Initiative to do a real-time heat mapping of the city. And you can see there's a light green rectangle, and that is roughly the areas of the Green Loop. And you can also see that downtown is some of the hottest areas in the city. If you look, further to the east, you start having a lot greener neighborhoods and larger green space that cools not only the space, but the areas around it. And if you look to the west where those lighter areas are, that is the Jordan River corridor. And the neighbors around that, the Jordan River, greatly benefit from the cooling effects of that green space. What we found on a typical day is that there can be as much as a 15-degree difference between those cooling areas with green space and then the unshaded hardscape. And so when you're talking about, an area that you're getting 100-degree temperature and then it's 115 degrees, it makes a huge difference in whether those spaces are comfortable or utilized. Next slide. Another thing that the Green Loop does, it improves access. So on the diagram to the left are the existing green spaces, both publicly owned and privately owned in the downtown area. And what we calculated is less than or about 30% of downtown residents live within that 5-minute walk of a green space. With the Green Loop, it increases the number of residents within that 5-minute walkshed to 60%. It also takes that 1.9% of green space downtown all the way up to 5.7% green space, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. It does make a big difference, even at 5%. What we learned during engagement was that the biggest reason people visit a green space is because it's close to home and it has mature trees. So next slide. The other thing that the Green Loop does is it helps, it adds more connections, making the overall city more connected. And one of the things the city's also working diligently on is east-west connections for bikes and peds. And those are much tougher because we have the freeway going north-south, the river going north-south. And so it's easy in the city to move north-south and harder east-west. As you get the Green Loop in, it ties into many of these existing east-west connections, and it makes all areas of the city much more accessible. Next slide. Why a Green Loop? So next slide. So we hired, one of the things we wanted to do, we wanted to take this big idea, this big lofty idea, and understand, can we really do what we want to do? And we felt the first thing was to take one leg of the cord of the loop. So we took the 200 East corridor, so it's 9 blocks, and took that to about 30% design, so a full schematic design, in order to test, can we, given all the constraints, actually produce the results that we want? And the purpose of that was also to use the outcomes of it for planning of future segments. So the existing conditions of our corridors show that about over 70% of our right-of-way, 132-foot right-of-way, is dedicated to hardscape, roadway and parking, with only 10% for sidewalk and bike lanes, and that much also for green space. And what the Green Loop allows us to do is to flip that script and reduce that asphalt so that we can bring in far more green space. Next slide. Another thing that the Green Loop does is adds a lot of economic opportunity. It will connect and link to multimodal trails throughout the downtown. And then we also looked at economic successes of other cities who added greenways. And so currently we have 30 of our downtown, 34% is vacant or underutilized land. 27% is surface parking, and 24% is tax exempt of our land downtown. And that's high because we have a lot of church and institutional properties downtown. So a couple of those examples we looked at, a greenway project in Lancaster, California, generated $130 million in private investment and $273 million in economic output in the 2 years following completion. This diagram shows how influential peds and cyclists are, and they spend an average of $70 more a month at local businesses than motorists. The Indianapolis Cultural Trail has seen a $3.56 million in annual spending by trail users. Tourism, it can create a sense of place and community. With the Rose Kennedy Greenway in Boston, saw more than 1.7 million visitors along that 17-acre greenway and hosts 400 free events downtown. And Salt Lake City's 9 line, which is the southern leg of the Green Loop, was able to implement the active transportation and the road diet portion, but not the greening yet. And even with those changes, we saw 375,000 visits last year. And so the corridor, you're seeing a lot of transformation already with new local businesses emerging along the corridor and a really vibrant culture of walking and biking. So the next slide. So this one talks a little bit about the community engagement efforts we did to talk about the Green Loop. And one of the things we find is you can plan and do a lot of engagement and outreach, and you still only touch a small segment of the population. And something like transforming our roadways, we've really wanted to get the attention of as many people as possible. So that center image there in the top is of a pop-up project we did that we had up for 6 weeks, and we took one block along 200 East and did a temporary park in the center of the street. We brought in 190 trees and we planted them in these very large soil bags. It's a linear park. We brought in 2 containers that had temporary uses. We had a stage, we had a concessions. Every day we had food trucks, and on the weekends, on Friday and Saturday, we had bands and events. And then we also had food and drinks. And it was probably the best way I've seen of really sharing the idea of the Green Loop and how we can reimagine our streets, and that there is room for everyone. We also learned during that process, this was just post-COVID, just how important, I think we learned things about how the roadway was being used that we might not have in any other way. And that was simply understanding the role of, ride share, deliveries, things like that, in our right of way, and to provide ample space for those uses. The other things you can see there is we had our public utilities, so do a demonstration with their equipment and showing us the access they needed. And so we could figure out how to accommodate that in our plans. We did bike tours, and then we had a workshop where we rolled out a giant plan, and we had folks actually pin flags of what they wanted to see along that corridor. And I think that that pop-up project, at the time, it may have seemed expensive, but it was probably the greatest return on investment for getting attention and sharing the big idea. It was about, I think all in, it was about $280,000 in 2022. Okay, next slide. The other groups we really had to work with was all the stewards of the right of way. And so this project enabled us an opportunity to work closely with all of the other entities that have some role in the right of way. And that included, compliance, Downtown Alliance, economic development, emergency management, which includes fire and police, our facilities, planning, our Arts Council, the Redevelopment Authority. And so we had 3 sessions really getting into the details of the plan. Something that we also learned through this process was you have many departments that have a role in the right of way, but they're all co-equals. And so we realized we needed really the sponsorship of the mayor's office in this project in order to help sort of facilitate decision making and path to move forward, because you could imagine many of these departments, they may have competing interests. And so we needed a one city perspective. And since that time, through this process, since the process, the mayor's office hired a senior advisor to help facilitate the discussions of the Green Loop and advance this project. And it has made all the difference. So next slide. Another thing that we looked at, and I know this one's hard to read, and I'll just say we studied all the tasks and all the things that have to happen in the right of way, which are on that y-axis, and then all the departments have a role in doing that on the x-axis, and sort of filled the box to identify the overlap and the gaps. Also, a really important aspect of a project of this scale. Next slide. So with all of that, we could start thinking about developing the concept for the green loop. So next slide. So this is a like a schematic of, again, 9th South. So it is 9 blocks, and for us in our very large blocks at 660 feet per block, that represents about a mile and a half. And they do change dramatically from South Temple all the way to 9th South. So next slide. One of the things that we looked at was within that 132-foot right of way, we wanted to understand, we have a lot of roadways that have a median in the center with roads on either side. So we wanted to study that typology and what it could return in terms of green space and amenities and traffic flow. Or if we put the green space on one side of the street and we combine the 2 lane of traffic in one paving, what does that yield? And the takeaway for us is that it was of greater benefit to have the green space located on one side of the street. And either framework can be considered on other street corridors, depending on the constraints and then access needs, if there's a lot of driveways or other things that drive that layout. So next slide. So throughout the process, we constantly asked ourselves the question, is this worth it? And we set high expectations for success. So we measured that, and we learned that we could bring up to 54 acres of new open space downtown along the green loop. We can add the urban forest. We have space for stormwater management, and we can include high quality bike facilities. And our goal was really to create 70% public space and green space. Next slide. And here, this is an example of a section of it where the road is down to 2 lanes instead of, with some select parking on either side and drop off areas. And then a separated bike lane, a stormwater quality area, and then amenitized public open space. And so this is what we're aspiring to. Next slide. And then another one, I think this is probably my favorite diagram from the project, which shows how important it was to reconcile not only above ground conditions, but underground conditions. And, I think we initially thought our public utilities, we could easily move them around as part of the project, but they are very challenging. And so we've come up with ways to sort of accept the public utilities underground as existing conditions. And we generally need to keep hardscape over the water and sewer and stormwater. And so we've been able to, for the most part, show the roadway over major water and sewer, and then you see the bike lane on the other side. Another thing that came out of this was there is a lot of private utilities, so fiber, gas, things like that. And one of the things that we talked about was installing, as part of our project, a private utility duct or bank. So it would be a vault that goes in the street, and then all the private utilities would go within that rather than be throughout the corridor. And that would make it easier for the city to manage those private utilities, and then those private utilities to manage their own access. So it's a 360-degree analysis to be able to add more green space and where you can plant trees. So next slide. I'm almost done. So another thing we had to incorporate was fire access. So with these very tall buildings, there's strict kind of fire access so that the fire truck can come in, do lay down, and reach up to the top of the building. And so we've incorporated these fire plazas so they can get in, and they are in select places along the corridor. Next slide. Just a quick, so we did an analysis and we found that we could get to 66% of the green space looking at what we were able to achieve. And we think that's really good. And depending on different areas of the corridor, we could even increase it. So next slide. And this one is a little bit more rendered so that it can show where sort of specific programming elements can happen, like water quality areas, art, play, and gathering spaces. Next slide. And how, the green loop could look once you have that space for green space. So what we're really saying is out of that 132 feet right of way with 70%, you're looking at somewhere around 90 feet wide of green space that you can bring in all kinds of amenities to add to downtown. So next slide. And then the cost. The other thing we wanted to understand was to get a realistic view of the cost. And we felt we couldn't do that until we really got into a high level concept and drew it out and costed it. And our estimate is that each block is going to be about $9 to $10 million. And we also think that is equivalent to about 6 acres. So you're in the somewhere around not quite $2 million an acre for park space development. And if we were to buy 54 acres of land for downtown, if we were competing, we estimated at current sort of square foot costs, it would also be around 350 million. So we're essentially cutting that cost in half by re-envisioning how we use our right-of-ways. And the other thing is we broke down those costs into buckets that match funding streams. So active transportation, green space, which we get impact fees for, and then private utilities. So we can start to put together funding mechanisms for that. So with that, I believe that is my last slide. So we are currently working on detailed design for 500 West and targeting some section of that for early implementation. And that is an area of town that has a significant amount of developer interest. So we want to bring those two interests together to collaborate with those private interests on the look and feel of the Green Loop. So again, thank you so much for having me and allowing me to share this project with you.
Thanks so much, Nancy. And you can see there, a big picture vision, the realities of getting to it, having to deal with utilities, having to deal, with fire access, all of those issues, but still figuring out how to move it forward and even thinking about capital stacking in terms of how you're going to actually fund the thing. Now, over to you, Ronnie. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Awesome. My name is Ronnie Picetto. I am the Executive Director of Seven Canyons Trust. Next slide, please. Right. So for those who are not familiar with our organization, Seven Canyons Trust is a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Salt Lake City. Our mission is simple, profound, yet really complicated at the same time. And it really it's all about uncovering and restoring the buried and impaired creeks in the Salt Lake Valley. We have very humble beginnings. Actually, we started in a University of Utah urban ecology class back in 2014, where they were learning about the status of these creeks, these buried and impaired waterways. And in 2014, and as a result of that class, they were assigned to complete a document called 100 Years of Daylighting, and you can see the image of the cover page of that, where they were basically tasked with envisioning 100 years of restoring restoring the impaired and impaired creeks in the Salt Lake Valley. And so after the end of that class, they couldn't get enough of it, and they decided to go ahead and create this organization to do that work. Next slide, please. So collectively, there are 7 creeks that we work to defend. Collectively, there are 21 miles of buried creeks and 79 impaired waterways in the Salt Lake Valley, and you can see that on the map there. Impairment identification is not necessarily based off of my definition or my board's definition or us as an organization, but it is actually drawn from the Clean Water Act. Another key thing that I do want to take the time out to point out is to define the term daylighting, which is the process of uncovering. It's more or less a spectrum. So on one end of the spectrum, you have something called natural daylighting, which is basically putting it back like it naturally was. Then you have something in the middle called architectural daylighting. That's you're still daylighting, but not to the extent of a natural. It's a lot more engineered. And then you have on the opposite end something that's called cultural daylighting, which is more about bringing the creek to the surface and the collective consciousness of people's minds that there is a creek flowing, more or less. And we utilize that to help gain momentum on the actual physical daylightings. Next slide, please. So after establishing Seven Canyons Trust in 2014, the first thing we did was identify where our initial demonstration project would take place. We wanted to focus on restoring the buried waterway and creating a project that would demonstrate the environmental, social, and community benefits of creek daylighting. And we chose this parking lot. And it's not just a parking lot, it's a space where Red Butte Immigration and Parley's Creek actually run underneath in a Piper culvert before joining into the Jordan River. And it's located in the Glendale neighborhood on the west side. Now, although you will see what it looks like when we first started, you all at the end of the presentation, you get to see what it looks like at the end. And it's a very, very stark difference. So beyond the fact of where the location of where the creek is, we also took a look at the challenges within the west side. The west side of Salt Lake is where our vulnerable population resides, and so there was a historic reputation of the creeks buried in pipes. There was industrial land uses and asphalt dominance, and I would argue it's still kind of going on. Lack of tree canopy and shade, heat island impacts on frontline communities, and limited access to quality nature and waterways. So maybe you all have some sort of alignment in those characteristics in your communities of needing nature-based solutions, urban heat island reduction, community resilience, and really equitable public space investment. Next slide, please. So if this project were moved from Salt Lake City to whatever community you can imagine in the state of California, and we had to start from the very beginning, like somebody just ripped it away. We had to start all over again, and we had to pursue this opportunity. There would obviously need to be some sort of strong alignment between the program's values and the Through Creeks Confluence project, right? And so, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, from the team, there was a couple of values, right? There was heat reduction, partnership, belonging, and lasting community benefit. So for the remainder of the presentation, I will discuss the Three Creeks Confluence project through the lens of these shared values in hopes that you may get the most out of this story beyond just kind of telling you it. And, maybe in hopes that you will consider how it might inform your own project and the pursuit of this awesome opportunity that I wish we had in the state of Utah. Next slide. All right, so daylighting has so many different benefits. We usually describe this in the aspect of HER, which is broken down into human impact, ecological, economic, and resilience, flood mitigation, more or less. Now, I don't have necessarily time to cover all of those, but I do want to zoom in on the H, but it's all about human impact. Usually when you're establishing like these beautiful green spaces, people think of like the aspect of improving your physical health, your mental health, maybe forming a sense of belonging, but there's so much more to that. And so, these waterways really serve as a really great cooling infrastructure. So when you have an urban heat island, and I'm sure many people probably know this, that it's really generated from a couple of different sources. You have kind of the vehicular use, you have the urban fabric, in terms of it soaking it up. So your buildings, your impervious surfaces, things of that nature. And so typically for a lot of people, what they think of in terms of mitigation is shade, your tree canopy. And people think of that because, of the direct shade that it provides, which is not quite true. It's because in its photosynthesis process, it releases water vapor in the air. These trees and these plants do. And so when you think about uncovering a creek, it's filled with nothing but water and it releases water vapor into the air. And if you're really smart about creek uncovering and the design of it, you can get a 2-in-1 deal. Not only can you get the release of water vapor from the creek directly, we also get secondary from, restoring the riparian forest adjacent to the creek and getting the trees to release water vapor into the air. Right. So it's a really cool. So if you didn't get anything from what I just said, from a scientific standpoint, it lowers ambient temperatures, increases evapotranspiration, reduces impervious surface heat retention, expands shade opportunities. So waterways nurtures, the trees too, and creates a cooler public gathering area. So at the confluence, we included impervious surfaces throughout the space, and then we encouragement of non-vehicular modes of transportation like walking, running, biking, so on and so forth. Things that doesn't necessarily need a motor to do. Next slide, please. The second one is partnership. So that's all about recognizing that effective solutions require both community knowledge and institutional capacity. It's without saying that collaboration has made this project possible. Yes, there was an initial spark within Seven Canyons Trust, but it was really owned and loved and nurtured by the entire community. And so these projects become stronger when multiple sectors share ownership, when community voices share implementation, when there's environmental goals connected to the arts, health, education, so on and so forth. So like I said, this project started in 2014. We didn't get finished with it until 2021. So there definitely has to be momentum and fire going throughout it. So our partners included Salt Lake City Corporation and all of their awesome departments, nonprofits, artists, educators, landscape architects, and their consultants, community volunteers, watershed advocates, residents themselves to fall in love with the site. And so on the bottom right image, you will see the American Planning Association Award recognizing this project particularly for its strong partnerships, community engagement, and collaborative approach to planning and implementation. Next slide. Then you have the value of belonging, which is all about ensuring that infrastructure is designed with and for the people who utilize it. Now, like I said earlier, community was definitely not an afterthought for this project. For any really great project, I don't think it ever really is. But the community story was really embedded into components of this space and shaping its story. So we centered youth engagement, public art, volunteer stewardship, cultural storytelling, or cultural daylighting, to really hold space on that promise that we're going to reach this goal sooner or later, and free public programming. So the cultural storytelling wasn't just, your visual art. It also came into interpretive dance and just really holding space. So climate resilience, really succeeds where communities emotionally connect to a space. That makes any sense. And so some examples is that we did, and we still are doing, environmental and creek education in this space, and community cleanups to be long-term stewards of the space, engage more than 600 people a year to do this work. Then there's youth art collaborations that we do as well, public events at the Confluence, not just our organization, but other organizations holds the event space at the Three Creeks Confluence. There's cultural daylighting initiatives as well, and an ongoing collaboration with Salt Lake City and its associated departments. So this was consistently done throughout the creation of the space, and obviously even after the establishment of it. Next slide. Then you have, last but not least, the lasting community benefits. That's all about investments extending beyond immediate outputs to contribute to a sustained change. So the picture on the bottom right is what the Confluence looks like today. So a parking lot filled with weeds and abandoned cars turning into that. What a miraculous transformation, especially for this community. And so the ongoing programming for organizations across the valley, utilizing the space to access water. So it comes through events, it comes through other organizations utilizing it. Anytime, I come there all the time for programming, and usually there's another organization that's jumping in and out of that, on and off the ramp with their canoes and kayaks from trekking the Jordan River. And then other families utilizing it, from fishing to so on and so forth. So what's not photographed here is the second bridge that provides greater urban connectivity from the Jordan River Trail to the eastern section of the west side. So this is one of the very few opportunities trail users have to cross over. The Jordan River Trail is about a 45-mile long regional trail connected or adjacent to the Jordan River, and it connects about 15 cities and communities together. So to have that bridge was a really big deal for this community. And so much more has happened since this confluence was finished in 2021. Next slide. So as stated before, this site was a demonstration project, and it really opened the door for more collaboration across the valley. Shortly after, the Seven Greenways Vision Plan was created, and the Seven Greenways Vision Plan is an opportunity master plan created by Seven Trust and the listed cities on the screen to improve these creeks from a short-term level, so 5 to 10 year, to a long-term 100 years timeline. And so this document acknowledges the creek history, uses shared metrics across jurisdictions, and helps prioritize where restoration will reduce riparian stress, and moves from this state of observation and paralysis of like, how in the world are we going to take this thing on, to, we actually have an action plan to refer back to once we complete a project and really feel a sense of accomplishment. Next slide. So there are opportunity sites that were made in collaboration with partnering cities, and they're really divided up into four core elements: water, community, urban, nature, and recreation. And as you can imagine from these elements, our future work will look different for each opportunity area. So it may include one or a combination of the following. So daylighting projects from a Piper Culvert, expanded green corridors, cultural activation along waterways, community resilience hubs, heat mitigation through riparian restoration, so on and so forth. So ultimately, this work is about understanding these opportunities that exist within the valley and really building trust, meeting the community where they are, meeting these creeks where they are. And so the Three Creeks Confluence just ultimately really became a bridge to something so much greater than a single project. It expanded the conversation about the role our waterways play in our urban environment and help people to see the ecological, the social, and cultural value that these healthy creeks brings to our community. And so with that being said, our next step is the Folsom Trail. And we're working to uncover City Creek. So I am pretty much finished. Thank you so much for sharing space and hearing our story. And I look forward to hearing some of your questions. Thanks.
Yeah, Ronnie, do you want to take a moment just to talk about how you went from learning about the project you shared with us to now thinking about the next project and sort of what is that process of like learning from one and trying to bring it to your next project?
You kind of broke up on me. Sorry, what was the question?
Colin, you may want to jump in, but what did you learn from the first project that you're now taking in as you're doing the next creek restoration project?
There are quite a different things that I'm learning, and honestly, each space is completely different in terms of how you approach it, and the longevity that it takes. So, for instance, Three Creeks Confluence is probably a little less complex than I would say the Folsom Trail is, which is, a little less than a mile long. It's the largest creek daylighting that we've ever done and that the city's ever gone through before. But one thing I have learned is really reconnecting with the roots of the community itself, and just again keeping that fire going. It takes years for this stuff to happen, as you can possibly imagine. Um, and yeah, just keep holding space, and holding for that promise. It can be very discouraging for the community. They keep looking back of like, okay, like we're ready for this. When is this going to happen? And I'm like, patience, guys, patience. And they're like, okay, but like you got to keep moving. And I'm like, well, like, going back to the Three Creeks Confluence, it was 200 feet of daylighting. And it took us from 2014 to 2021 to come to this full vision. And you guys that Glendale can't imagine their world without Three Creeks Confluence. And you guys are gonna have to undergo the same process, and the same momentum. So
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons that we have this demonstration requirement in our early grants is so that you can do something that people can see as you do planning. Because after doing this for a long time, I think a lot of people, we've been part of planning projects where nothing's happened for 5 years, 10 years longer. And so we're trying within the funding, we're distributing to like make sure that doesn't happen, to make sure there's something that happens in addition to the planning process. Because I've just seen so many communities just burn out on all the planning with nothing physical to show for it. Nancy, I was wondering if you could just briefly talk about the power as you're trying to build momentum within City Hall and also within community for projects. Can you talk a little bit about the power of design and making images that can get people to be attached to that future?
Yeah, I mean, I think they are very important to create a feeling about what you can get with the space and how much is possible. Plan view is a very difficult thing for people to understand, and even recently we were sharing a plan for a park and with lots of trees, only a plan view. And one of the comments from someone was, I don't want any trees on the edges. I want them all in the back and in the center. And I was like, why is that? She said, I want to be able to see into the park. And I think that was a really good illustration about how limiting just a plan view study is. And people are more used to sort of thinking about they can relate to those images, and that's what people get really excited about. I think there's another layer to it as well, that it's there's a role for more sketchy plans when you're trying, maybe you're proposing something that people need to warm up to, and that really communicates that this is an idea we're exploring. And then as you get more certain, you can make your renderings look more and more realistic. And if you're trying to get partners and funders involved, they really want to see those realistic. They want to know what they're going to contribute to. So I think both are really important, and the plans really communicate the stage you're at in the process, but they're essential, those renderings and 3D images.
Thanks. Well, thank you. Just incredible projects that you're working on. I love the idea of accomplishing something, but also having that bigger vision that's driving long-term change in your communities.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing, and we really appreciate it. So, Angela, if you go back to the last slide, you can join us tomorrow for the City of Austin. Mark has been there working on resilience for years and has been doing a lot on extreme heat and speaks nationally on their extreme heat efforts in Austin. So we can learn more about that work tomorrow. And then we will have exclusively any questions you have about the guidelines, and we'll walk you through the round 2 guidelines more detail and allow for deep questions. So you can join us for those sessions on the 25th and 30th. You can also register through the QR code here, as well as learn more about our upcoming events. So a huge thank you to Ronnie and Nancy. Thank you both. We really
Thank you.
and thanks everyone for being here. Take care. Thanks, Angelo.